So, you're thinking of moving to Palm Coast, Florida, but you're not sure what the deal is with all of the flood zones and how to prepare for a hurricane? That's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's video. We're going to go over the different flood zones, what flood zone X, flood zone A, which ones require flood insurance, and kind of go over some top level tips for preparing for hurricanes. We're going to get after it right now. In today's video, we're going to talk all about flood zones and hurricane preparedness. If this is your first time to the channel, make sure you tap the button below to subscribe, tap the bell for notifications, and you'll be notified the first time we put out new videos about Palm Coast, Florida living and moving to Palm Coast, Florida and the surrounding areas. My name is Stephanie Schulis with Keller Williams Realty, and we get calls, texts, and emails from people looking to make the move to Palm Coast, Florida every day, and we absolutely love it. So whether you're looking to make the move in the next 9 days or 90 days, give us a call, shoot us a text, send us an email, and we'll do everything we can to help you make a smooth move to Palm Coast, Florida. When it comes to flood zones, there are a few things that we need to establish right off the bat. The first is that flooding is the #1 natural disaster in the United States, and losses due to floods are typically not covered under your home insurance policy. And that's pretty shocking to a lot of people. FEMA flood zones are different than hurricane evacuation zones. And so when we're talking flood zone, we're not talking about whether or not you will likely be evacuated due to big storms like hurricanes coming through. We are just talking about FEMA's predictions on when on the risk of flood for those areas. You do not need to live near water to be susceptible to flooding. A lot of times I hear things like, oh, I don't want to live near the ocean, or I don't want to live near a canal because I don't want flooding. It is absolutely possible and happens all of the time to have flooding issues on properties that are not located next to large bodies of water. So it's very important to pay attention to those flood zones rather than the proximity to water. The #1 thing I hear when I'm talking to people looking to make the move to Palm Coast, Florida is, I don't want to live in a flood zone. And my answer to that is, don't move to Florida. Pretty much everything here in Florida is going to be in a flood zone. It just comes down to whether or not it is a low risk, a moderate risk, or a high risk flood zone. Agents like myself can help you find and determine what flood zone it is in, but your insurance agents are going to be the one to use the flood insurance rate map or firm to decide your specific flood risk with that specific house. So knowing your flood zones from FEMA is a good starting point and can give you a good estimation, but to get specifics, you're going to want to speak with an insurance agent to really get dialed in specifically to that house. I personally work with insurance agents all of the time. They're very familiar with the area, and I'd be happy to recommend folks to talk to if that's something you're needing. Let's talk about zones. When it comes to low to moderate zones, we're going to be talking about Zone B, Zone C, and Zone X. Each of those zones has less than 1% chance of flooding every year. These zones are typically not required by your mortgage companies to have specific flood insurance. As I mentioned before, your standard homeowner's insurance policy typically doesn't cover flooding, so most mortgage companies will require you to have your standard home insurance policy as well as a flood insurance policy here in Palm Coast, Florida. However, if you're in zones B, C, X, you're likely not going to be required to have it, although it is still recommended that you do have a flood insurance policy. I'm sure we've all seen those stories on the news of families that have been absolutely devastated by that once in 100-year flood that came to an area that's never seen flooding before. That's where flood insurance comes into play. It's a just in case, it's a nice security blanket to have should that ever happen. And for those zones B, C, and X that are in the low to moderate risk, flood insurance is actually very affordable. Your high risk areas are going to be your zones A and AE here in Palm Coast, Florida. These zones have a more than 1% chance of flooding every year and a 26% chance of flooding over the next 30 years. These zones are typically going to be mandated to have flood insurance through your mortgage companies. So you're going to want to be aware of that if you're looking to buy in those areas, and you're going to want to make sure that you're having those conversations and getting those quotes and estimates during your due diligence period. Zone AR is also in the high risk zone. Zone AR is going to have increased risk due to construction happening on that property or nearby that property. So that can be harder to find when you're looking to buy homes, and you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at the most recent FEMA flood maps and not what it was zoned for when that person bought it and got their mortgage with. If you're looking to buy specific to coastal areas, your high risk areas are going to be V, VE, and V1 through 30. These have the greater than 1% chance of flooding every year. It's going to have the 26% chance of flooding over the next 30 years, and it's going to have the additional hazard of storm waves. So if you're buying in those areas, you are again likely going to be mandated to have flood insurance by your mortgage company, and it's going to be something that you want to get estimates on during your due diligence period of purchasing that home. It is possible to see Zone D represented on a FEMA flood map. Zone D just mean that it's undetermined flood hazards. So it's possible, but there's just not been enough data to assign specific rates to it. So that would be Zone D. You do not need to have a hurricane or big storms to have flooding, but those certainly get the most attention. An example for when you can have flooding without a hurricane would be when we have king tides, or also known as spring tides, that can affect the water levels in canals and the ocean and brings that water level up a little bit, and then we can have some residual flooding from that, especially if it's timed with just a typical rainstorm. Because hurricanes get the most attention, we're going to talk about flooding preparedness tied to hurricanes. One of the nice things about hurricanes is that we typically know they're coming from a long ways away versus other natural disasters like fires or earthquakes. Hurricanes tend to be talked about in the news for quite a few days as they're tracking, and you'll get to see how the storm's tracked on its way here to us on the east coast of Florida. Because of that, there's a lot of time that we can spend prepping and getting ourselves prepared to handle and weather the storm. The very first thing you can do when it comes to preparing for a storm is to take advantage of the tax-free month for supplies. Those supplies can include things like generators, batteries, flashlights, extra bottles of water, things like that, just things that you may need if you're in a big storm and you have to go without power for a little bit. There's a long list. I'll put a link to more information about the tax-free supply preparedness month so you can see all of the things that will be included and what the dates on those are. The other thing you can do in advance of storm coming is be sure that you know what your evacuation zone is. Again, your evacuation zone is going to be different than your FEMA flood zone. So you're going to want to know your evacuation zone. You're going to want to know your evacuation route, which way is advisable for you to get out the safest. And you're also going to want to have a basic evacuation plan. For example, the city of Palm Coast typically puts up shelters that people can temporarily evacuate to. However, not all of those shelters are going to be pet friendly. You're going to want to know which one is pet friendly. If you're planning to go get hotels and you have pets, you're going to want to know, which hotels are going to be pet friendly and going to be able to accommodate you, your family, potentially any medical needs, things like that. You're going to want to have some basic preparedness items in your home. That's going to be, I do recommend generators. During hurricanes, it is possible to lose power for a little bit, and in Florida, without power means without AC, and that is just not pleasant. So I do recommend you have a generator and a portable AC unit just in case you run out of power, and you can live in some basic comfort level while our city and county and state work to bring all of those power and energy levels back online. The other thing you're going to want, if you do take medication, you're going to want to make sure that you have enough to get you through a few weeks, just in case there's any problems at your pharmacy or your doctor's office or anything like that. You just don't want to risk being without kind of those basic everyday needs like that. You're going to want to make sure you have some ready-to-eat food, food that doesn't need to be refrigerated, food that you can eat. My little boy loves his peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, so that's our go-to during hurricanes, is to make sure we can prep those quickly and easily for him. So it's just things like that, just again in case you're without power, or if you do get evacuated, just things that you can kind of grab and go. Bottled water, something you're always going to want in any kind of natural emergency. Can't go without water. Food, shelter. If you know that you're in an area that does have a history of flooding, you're going to want to move as much furniture as you can up, put it on top of tables and things like that, and get as much as possible up off the ground. I would also advise, if you're on social media, is to follow your city and county emergency response groups on social media. They do a fantastic job of updating the minute evacuation orders are in place, of tracking the storms, of letting you know where you can go to get preparation items such as sandbags to help prevent flooding into the home and things like that. So those are fantastic resources. Again, I'll make sure that those are in the description below so that you can see those and get an idea for what those are. If you're not on social media, you're going to want to make sure that you know how to contact the county emergency response department, so that if you have any questions, you can ask them directly and kind of get that information before you need it, before there's a storm, before there's no power, and things like that. All in all, hurricanes can be pretty scary if you're new to the area and have never gone through them, but the city and the county here do a fantastic job of keeping us informed, of helping us prepare and helping us weather the storms. I've been here for a little over 5 years now. My husband's family grew up here. The storms that we get, thankfully, so far, hoping I'm not jinxing anything, tend not to be quite as bad, and definitely not as frequently as they can in other parts of Florida and other parts of the country. So we're a little lucky on that front so far. And one of the greatest things about this community and why I love living here so much is the community. If you are negatively impacted by a storm at any point, the community is going to rally around you and help make sure that you get back on your feet and help make sure that you have what you need to be safe and comfortable and resume your life and living here in Palm Coast, Florida. If you have any questions about flood zones or hurricane preparedness, make sure to leave a comment below, give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email, and I'll do everything I can to help answer those questions and help you make a smooth move to Palm Coast, Florida. We'll see you on the next video.